So I'm sitting here with Seth Kopald. He is the author of Self-Led, Living a Connected Life with Yourself and Others. He's an IFS, internal family systems practitioner, and a therapist in his own right. And that's my brief introduction of you, Seth. How about you introduce yourself?
Yeah. So, actually, I wouldn't call myself a therapist as a practitioner because I'm not. But I do use the model in a deep way with people, coaching people and be with their parts, heal their parts. I probably would lean more towards the mystical side of IFS than the clinical side. But my work has kind of meandered through time. Most of my life I was in education before IFS. So I worked in early childhood education as a Montessori teacher. I worked with Head Start programs, which is for birth to six children as well. For children in poverty and working with families. I've helped run a school. I got my PhD in organization management, really to help out with running those programs. And I find it really helped me lean into IFS. Having child development, I do a lot of parenting work. Also, organizational wise, my specialty was leadership. So we're looking at how do we, as ourselves, be the leader in our system to help gain trust with our parts, for our parts to trust us to take the lead. So a lot of my background, I think, really fits IFS rather well. And yeah, so my passion right now is working deeply with people to be the leader within their own life, to help the parts who react, the parts who get scared, to kind of have more trust in the system, to let self be the leader. And I find that does help. That's why the second title of my book is around relationships, because as we relate, I should say, to other people in the world, I find the more we lead from an authentic place, which we would call self-led, the more other people can be open to us and be able to collaborate with us, and the more we're open to collaborate. And I find it just helps life all the way around.
It does. And that's why we asked you onto the podcast. And organizational leadership, leadership in one's own life, relational leadership, do relate to what we're trying to accomplish with this podcast, which is to acknowledge that is a primary, challenge and doorway for anybody living a life, is to have agency, to be more proactive, to be open to feedback and consequences, to have the wherewithal to adjust, to to develop the emotional capacity for the ups and downs. And
That's right.
so here you are, and thank you. Appreciate
Thank you for having me.
you being here with me.
Yeah.
Well, you mentioned the secondary title of your book as being relational. The secondary title of our podcast implies crisis. It implies a phenomenon that we're all living with in terms of climate change, in terms of a political shift towards more arguably authoritarian ways of self-organizing, a rise in, the influence of religious institutions on women's bodies, on immigration. There's multiple violent conflicts happening in our world right now.
Yeah.
Excuse me. So I think this is just a lens, right? This is just a way of acknowledging a pressure that we all have to grapple with as we attempt to be self-led in our lives as we attempt to live with integrity and to
Yeah.
have healthy personal and professional relationships. I'm curious, like, how does that title land with you? How does that idea land with you? Do you see us Americans, us global Homo sapiens living in crisis? Is this distinct to this age? Is it a phenomenon of just being alive? Um, how does that idea of insight and action for times of crisis land with you?
Yeah. Good question. As you were talking, I was thinking, and when we teach about IFS, talk about these external constraints for us to be self-led, which means like these outside forces that can affect us, that activate us, that can get us angry, that can get us feeling hopeless, that, those parts of us could just blend. Um, so, I do see lots of crisis outside in the world. I do see, climate change is very disturbing, and a lot of the political things that are happening, and war and disruption. And I think a lot of us IFS people, like, secretly, not even so secretly, pray that if people could, be more self-led, we could think a lot of these problems could hopefully smooth out. Like, um, but I do notice, looking back in history, I'm not a historian by any real right, but I think about each generation of my father, mother, and others, that they all had something happening around the world that scared them, that threatened their lives, that threatened their feeling of safety. And different generations seem to use different strategies. Like, my parents were like to buckle down and hard work and, you know, get through it. And now I feel like there's like what I'm noticing is there's like an evolution of the human being. Like when I look at my own kids towards people that are, I think, more aware and more spiritual and more, and it could be just because I live in an area that facilitates that. But I do see the younger generations are being more open to differences and different types of people. Um, and I guess the way I personally react to all this is I know as a hope merchant in IFS, I hold very tightly that if I can be as close to my true essence as possible, if I can lean into my gifts, if I can lean into, not letting these crises create a polarity in me where I'm fighting against a side, if I'm angry and hateful, if I could hold living through a sense of compassion and love and outrage, like, because self energy can be like, we can see what's right and wrong, but I don't think anyone will listen to us if we're part of a polarity. And I think Dick Schwartz has been working with social activists about this topic, that the more we can, be in a self-led place, the more the other side might even listen to us. So I guess what I'm thinking is the more people can hold on to the parts of us that we've locked away, our essence, like the beauty within us, the way we like to thrive in our own systems, the more that can help balance some of the crises out there. And I think we end up showing up in our best way to model for others what life could be like and how a human could be with each other. Um, so I guess that's my personal focus of how I'm choosing to react to all the crises.
Yeah. I like what you said, that every generation has its sort of existential fear. I do think that's true. And I think we're facing a global situation that we've never faced before. I do think global warming is the issue of our age.
Yeah, I see
As
that.
is artificial intelligence. I mean, once artificial intelligence populates androids properly, I wonder if they'll consider humans superfluous or a threat. I do wonder about the power of the internet and machine learning. Those are the two things that I think
Yeah.
about at 2 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah.
I love what you said about being a hope merchant,
Mhm.
or a merchant of hope. I mean, the if we can't be the very thing that we wish, to see in the world, like what's the point of all this,
Right.
and somebody's got to go first. And,
Yeah.
many of the world's religions have these teachings buried in them, and
Right.
we're trying to make them relevant for our culture today.
Yeah.
And, that's part of why I wanted to talk to you.
Yeah.
And, um, and, because I'm not a practitioner or IFS trained, but I've read about it, and I've come across this term intersubjectivity, loosely defined as the sharing of common experiences, the sort of meta phenomenon of how we create reality that we all agree on. Um, so I'm interested in intersubjectivity, and I'm interested, just on this theme of crisis, I'm interested in the question of being wounded, of not understanding what we're doing here, of being inevitably wounded somehow by our parents, or by the first lover that rejected us, or by the bully that punched us in seventh grade. You know, getting into your 20s without a wound is basically impossible for existential or very real traumatic reasons. And I'm curious if what you think about this, if humans necessarily bond by addressing shared problems somehow, if this is like built into how we experience reality. Like, there's sharing joys, and then there's sharing fears and wounds.
Mhm.
Do you think what do you think about that in terms of
Yeah.
this word intersubjectivity, like of
Yeah.
the positive ways and the negative ways that we experience each other, and if
Yeah.
it's all baked in somehow?
Right. Well, one thing that came to mind first is how often people's systems, or I think they're, at least for Western culture in the United States especially, we've been essentially taught, programmed, legacy material coming into our systems, that you're supposed to pretty much hide all that, all the pain. You're supposed to pull up your bootstraps, and you're supposed to show up like, I can do this, you know, step up and do your work.
Right, it's
And,
weakness to admit any
right.
pain.
So what I've noticed though
Right,
is,
and weakness can be exploited, so you got to hide it.
yeah, right, exactly. But what I've noticed in the field, because there's a lot of us, working on our traumas and working on our pain, that when people do expose that, I've been noticing it creates really a deep level connections with other people. I just went to a grief retreat where people really showed their most painful things in a group setting with each other. And I would admit, I came in a little bit scared, like, how will I do that? How will I be able to show something like that to other people? And I would say I showed some of it. I didn't fully let it go completely. Um, but what I'm noticing more and more, that the more we lean into these vulnerabilities to kind of show people, I almost imagine, even if their people's brains aren't registering, like, this doesn't, why are you acting this way, human? You're not supposed to. That there's something in the system of the other person that says, yeah, I know that. Like, because grief is grief. Your story is different than mine, or shame is different. Shame is shame, but your story is different than mine, or loss, or fear of the planet. We all might have different stories in our head, but there's something that resonates with each other. So I do think it does create, if we're willing to share, like how painful it is to experience these things. Um, I do see it creating bonds. Um, and what I love about IFS, it gives us a vehicle, like who's sharing, right? So if my anger is sharing of what's happening in the world, we create polarities in other people. So if I start screaming like on Facebook about all what's happening in the climate, there's going to be others who just naturally will come to argue. You might even notice at home if one person really digs in about how angry they are at something else, even if you kind of agree, sometimes you just naturally want to give the other side just to create some balance because there's so much energy there that if I add to it, it's just going to get too much, right?
Mm-hmm.
So even in our own systems and against other people, polarity, I see like our whole country is polarized. The whole world is getting polarized. So the more we can share the problems of the world and share the problems within ourselves from a place that, in IFS, we say we talk about our anger, we talk about our frustration instead of letting the frustration spill onto another person or the anger fly against another person. The more likely they are to be able to hear us and say, I'm angry too about that.
Yeah, it's validating to hear you say that, and I'm interested in intersubjectivity and how we come to an agreed upon reality. And I think everything you just said supports that. And the problem I'm having is I feel like I'm like having a bad acid trip, not that I've ever consumed any illegal substances. Um, I feel like I'm losing my mind because I'm having this experience that does not have cultural resonance. I think there's aspects of our government, of various businesses that whether they admit climate change is happening or not, they really don't care because there's going to be winners and losers over the next 500 years, 50 years. And the whole point of the game is to be a winner.
Right.
And that, anyway, that way of thinking, that way of, that polarized way of thinking, I'm more important than you, um, to me is suicidal. It's just a recipe for imbalance, dysfunction, and chaos.
Right.
So that's my like daily struggle is to interface with this field of dissonance in an authentic, balanced, healthy, non-reactive, compassionate way. When inside I'm freaking out that nobody seems to care. I still drive a car. We heat our house with natural gas. Like we're caught up into these massive, massive systems that ultimately are contributing to human-caused climate change, but nothing is changing. And that dissonance is really painful for me. It's hard to engage with that without alienating every single person I talk to.
Right. Yeah, I do wonder. Well, one thing I can say, when there's polarities, there's often a stuckness, like nothing changes. And I do wonder if the commonality that you're talking about here is that I think both sides are afraid. Like when I look at the extreme right and extreme left and everybody in between, they're all seemingly reacting to some kind of fear. Maybe the fear is different,
Mm.
Like the fear of this group is different than the fear. But I'm curious, like, what would actually happen if we put both sides in a room and they said, can we, like, if I said to you, say you're on the opposite side of me on any of these issues, and maybe totally opposite politically minded, and you go off on your rant and I go off on my rant, what would happen if one person said, hey, like, I'm really sensing that you are actually afraid, or there's fear in you that if your way of thinking wasn't right, like if you all the things didn't happen the way you hoped they would happen, the world would tank. Like, and then you think that if the things didn't go the way you wanted, the world would tank. What if we
Right.
agree that the commonality is we're both afraid that if our way didn't go right, we would somehow lose everything we have?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that is a way to love your neighbor, you know, acknowledge their suffering. And it's, how to find the practical steps from that fear that
Right. But do you notice like a softening? Like I noticed when
eludes
I said
me.
that, there was a softening in you even right there. You're like, yeah, I love thy neighbor. It's like
Yeah.
it's the softening that I think would help us come. I don't know. I honestly don't know if I ever believe there'll ever be a time that all humans will see things from the same perspective, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And that's
I,
sad.
I think that's true. And
Uh, but if we
I
can
think,
understand each other,
yeah. Well, I wanted to interject that my main feeling is pain. Like I am afraid, you know, mostly for my kids,
yeah,
but personally, it's more a feeling of lack of integrity, a just a pain that I have to listen to institutions and companies lie to my face on a daily basis. Like it hurts to be treated like such a moron.
yeah,
That's my struggle.
it makes sense to me.
And
Yeah, and I guess other people have different strategies of handling it. I notice my system shuts down. Like, when all that's happening, I'm like, well, if I could just push all that away and just focus on what I touch, my system feels like I'll feel good, feel safe. But then I have this other critical part that can come in and be like, well, you're ignoring what's happening out there then. And how is that helping making any change? Um, so
yeah, I mean
it's,
that's the classic personal public political split.
well,
And I mean I would challenge anybody and say that the personal is political. Everything we do has ramifications. And so everything matters in that sense. So
yeah,
your strategy, I don't think is shutting down really. It's magnetizing and empowering, what you love.
yeah, I hope so. Uh, but I hear you, man. And well, here's the thing. It's like one thing I know is that, and I don't want this to, I really don't believe in also like toxic positivity. Like just be okay and see everything like shiny and everything will be fine. Because I don't believe that either. But what I notice is when I start focusing on all the things that valid things that you're talking about, and I can feel the despair coming, and I can feel the anger and the unjustness. What I feel happen is like a constriction, and I start becoming less effective to even anyone, to myself, to anyone else. And so what my, you know, my personal belief or hunch is that if I can somehow not be ignorant to what's happening in the world and not ignore it, but find a way to be as centered as I can. And to honestly, what I think it is like what really what's happening in the world right now, the true feeling is probably grief. Like Francis Weller, one of the stages of grief is like what's happening to the world. You could feel it in your cells because you're an animal of this planet. So when something is burning, when something is destroyed, when something is polluted, it might not be in your conscious mind, but he believes you feel it in your bones. And for some people, it's really present and they'll like really feel the grief of it. Where others, it's kind of hidden, I think. So I think the real feeling is like, how do I sit with the grief of everything that you're talking about, with what's happening with corporations and the media and everything else, which is like the real feeling. Like it's, but our parts don't want us to feel that often. So they get angry, they push back, they spit out hateful things on social media, or they, you know what I mean? Like all these
I
other
do.
behaviors happen that aren't really addressing even the authentic feeling that's happening inside. And I wonder what would happen, because I do notice from going to this grief retreat that was put on by Cinco, she was amazing, that when you allow yourself to feel the real feeling, there is an aliveness and even a way to touch joy underneath that, because you're actually fully alive in that moment.
Sure.
And afterwards, after you express it, like for instance, when somebody really goes through a serious grief kind of process, like a loss, and they're crying and even wailing, you find at the end there's usually some kind of laughter. Like they get to a place where they just like something else unlocks. And not to say we should find a way to be in joy as the planet is burning around us, but I just get a sense that if we could just feel what the real feeling is here, that we'll be more effective, because we'll gain more of our authentic selves to do something about it. And leading from our protective systems of lashing out at people, of creating more polarity, I feel like, say if we all rise up to attack, put on Facebook or Instagram how horrible this one corporation is, then they have to put up their shields and dig in and fight back. Oftentimes, or they'll want to. Maybe they'll fold and it'd be great for the world. But what I typically see is one person lashes out, other person's lash out. It's like what was the feud? The McCoys and
The Hatfields and the McCoys.
This never ends, right?
Yeah. I mean, to that extent, I've removed myself from social media, and
yeah,
I'm a much happier person as a result.
Yeah.
I mean, there's something in your personal story about parenting and the divorce you went through and how that led to various, study and insights for you.
Yeah.
I mean, parenting, whether you're an actual parent of physical children or you show love, towards, things and people in your life. I mean, it's just an idea. And
yeah.
But, parenting is, from my perspective, a stage that leads directly to self-evaluation, self-questioning. There's so much, failure involved, and you're dealing with a person, an animal, that thing that has its own mind and that will see things differently. And do you think parenting can be turned into a global movement to address climate change?
Well, I do honestly believe parenting is probably the only way I can perceive as a way, if we hope for peace in the world or change. Because if we raise children with a consciousness of like understanding and peace, or even a way to how do you take care of the planet, it seems easier to do that than to try to change these adults who are ingrained and they're locked into their current patterns. So I do think that we can. The sad thing for me is that what I see in my 20-year-olds and kids younger is that because of how they see the world through the media, and my kids were born right before, like, months before my daughter was born months before 9/11. So the world has changed since my kids were born, um, a lot of these kids feel really hopeless. Like, why
Yeah.
should I, like, I got out of college. Why should I, like, when I graduated college, it was like, man, the life is in front of me, man. I have choice. I could just do what I want and like embrace my life. And I'm noticing more and more talking to my kids and their peers, they're kind of looking around going, why would I try? I mean, the world is burning up, falling apart. So these outside pressures, like sadly, are hitting our kids really hard, and especially with social media, because everybody's life is on display, and if you're not perfect in all this with each other on these apps, that it's really challenging. And I do believe kids are evolving in a way that, like, if we're going to be saved, it's going to be by these kids.
Yeah.
Um, because they are evolving to more socially just beings than we were, and we are.
True.
But it's sad because I did have this hope through parenting that our kids would like just feel like, you know, we can do anything, and attachment parenting, that we could, um, these secure bases that we created for these kids, but they still have a lot of anxiety because of what's the state of the world.
They
Um,
do.
so, but I do still, when I can say this, when working with clients and working with my own system, the lack of stability in your own system, I really believe is rooted in, did you have adults throughout your growing up life? Doesn't even have to be your parents, but did you have adults in your life who saw you, who who loved you for your uniqueness and supported you? And without those things, people are struggling in the world. And I find that, when we re-parent ourselves with IFS and help our parts who are stuck in the past get that love and attention and attunement they need. And I'm also finding, working with groups of people, like I had a situation during this training where I said, if I was your father, this is what I would have wanted to say to you. And they're like, what is it? And I shared it. And it was deeply healing for this person to see an older man say to you, this shouldn't have been your job. We should have been there for you. We should have seen that you were struggling through this, and you shouldn't have been alone with it. And I feel like, so parenting is a key way to create humans who feel like, I'm ready to go out into the world and do something, because I had, people allowed me to develop into myself.
Yeah. No, it's beautifully said. And I think part of it for me, in terms of the pain and the grief that you were talking about, that's sort of in the zeitgeist or whatever, or in ourselves, because the planet is suffering, is changing. Um, like there's the core feeling of parenting to me is grief on some level. Like I have gotten so much joy and from my kids and over time and today, but it's this constant process of letting go. Like they never stay at the stage they're at. They shed that skin and change and grow and move away and become less dependent. And it's this constant, like, the love I feel for them is inextricable from the grief of losing them.
Mm.
Um, which is like matched by the joy of meeting them. Like when they come into the world, it's such a miracle. It's totally, you can't explain it. Like, a scientist or whatever can,
Right.
whatever, create a formula and tell you what happened, but it's still just, it's a miracle. It's an absolute miracle to be a part of a birth. And that wonder grief is inextricable from that wonder to me, because of just like the cyclical regenerative nature of life. Like,
Mm.
and the older I get, like I can't experience grief without joy, and I can't experience joy without grief. And parenting just brings that into such sharp relief. And the and I think raising children that can hold, that aliveness, um, and be brave in terms of facing their parts in IFS language, to face all the polarization, the anger, the fear, the denial, and to not get pulled too far into the whatever the hyper joy of addiction, or the depression of grief. Like, to teach them to be centered and to act from that place. I do see my kids doing a better job of that at their age than I did at my age, and that does give me hope. And I do think that humanity wins over time. Institutions, come and go, and that the phenomenon of parenting, of loving something, of loving an animal, of loving a garden, just pouring yourself into something else, I think is healing. And I like to think of my parenting as a alternative to global warming.
Yeah. I wouldn't mind, if you don't mind, I'd love to go back to you were saying, like, parenting is like this series of like losses, or like losing them. When I was a preschool teacher, and this was just in the microcosm of like helping our kids like get dressed by themselves, or go to the bathroom without being scared, these little things. And I came up with this analogy that there's two ways to love our kids. And if people aren't seeing me, I'm like hugging myself, like holding them tight, or holding a baby. And over time, it's like this opening our arms to like let them do things by themselves. And it is like, in some ways, it is like a loss. I always joke like, oh man, the umbilical cord is stretching so thin now, it's like threads, right? Because they're like getting farther and farther away. But what I'm noticing as a parent of adult children, that our children, well, one, from an IFS perspective, they still have these young parts inside that always need to feel the love and attunement of their parents for them to feel secure in the world.
Mm.
And I think even with our adult children, that if we can keep reminding them that I see you, I love you, I support you, I'm behind you, and when you have a need, I'm your go-to guy here. I'm your dad. I'm your mom. And that, we might have parts that feel like it's a loss. But what I'm noticing is, even my child went to Spain for a year, like the connection, there's still like this connection that's still there, that everyone on the planet craves to know that they're being held by their parent.
They do. It's universal. And the way I think about it is, parenting is like you're there with like a fan, and you're like blowing underneath their wings. You're providing the loft for their wings until they learn to feel the wind and catch the wind on their own.
Right. And even when they're flying on their own, when they glance back to see you're there, like you're cruising, like give it a little nod. Yep, I'm still here. I'm still here. Even if they're 50 or 70, whatever it is, it's like we all want to know. And how painful is it when you don't feel that love and support from the people that either raised you, created you? It's like, it's very simple, and it could mean like your kid doesn't call you for 2 months, 3 months, because they're really busy, but they should never have to question if their parent or their caregiver it loves them or cares for them or would be there for them if they needed them. So within that security, they can go off and fly around the world. And if the moment they have to question that, they lose power in their flight.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree. And that is, why parenting is a spiritual quest. It is helping your child connect to themselves and connect to this great force that's out there, like things build upon themselves, and transitioning from, the home to being self-sufficient, requires so much, creativity and hard work and patience. But people usually do, catch the updraft at some point. They become a part of something, and it carries them forward, and just trusting that's real, and that, you know, being self-led is teachable, um, is a spiritual path, and it connects us all. I mean, we all have the same bodies. We're all here on earth. We got to breathe and eat and drink, and, it's a universal thing. And,
One thing, going back to our original discussion, as you're talking about this, what's hitting me is like, I would probably bet all the money I have, and that if you find any world leader that is seen as like a person who's hurting people, like their policies, or like we would think of like, oh gosh, this person is not good for the world, right? I would almost guarantee that they didn't have the love and support they needed as a child.
right. Yeah.
So that's how I see parenting as a way to heal the world. Because if all of these kids, I mean, I know I'm a pie in the sky diehard optimist, but if we were all able to love our kids the way they need to be loved, and not make them become like us or become a thing, like so much of parenting is like, you're this way, and my job is to help you become something else. That means how you are right now is not lovable.
Hmm.
The key is like, I love you as is. And that gives them the confidence to do all these things we hope they do in life. Like, so our parts are dying for them to be successful, because then we look good as parents. But when we lead from those parts, we often shame our children. Like, you're not doing good enough. You need to get your A's. You need to do this, do X, Y, Z. But if we could really see our kids and love them and support them, and all those kids become CEOs of these corporations, and all these kids become world leaders. Now, maybe it's too optimistic in my thinking, but my gut tells me, my bones tell me that the world would be a better place.
Yeah, I mean, that's why I asked you that question. I had a feeling you would pick it up and run with it. The greatest joy is seeing your children succeed, right? And that's not, success by, a monetary perspective. Just to see your kids succeed at life, like that's that they have friends, that they have hobbies, that they know how to cook a meal, like that's the best feeling in the world as a parent, just that shared joy. And that's what's missing for me in the public discourse right now, is like the shared joy. Like, I want the Chinese, to be happy. Like,
Mm.
I like there's got to be a way, for people to be well without that wellness detracting from somebody else.
Yeah.
Like, that's a core belief of mine, and I want that to be true. And parenting, exemplifies that to me.
And I guess, and we're kind of jumping into I guess, a somewhat of a philosophy. Maybe this is a truth that I believe, that people's natural state is good if it's supported, right? So if people are loved and attuned, have attunement, and are that they would be open and compassionate. So if we believe other countries would be healthy and happy, it would mean they'd want to cooperate with us. They'd want to like find a way to solve these world problems together.
All
So I
right,
think
that's
trauma is what makes people want to hurt each other, because I've been hurt, and the only way to stay safe is to hurt other people. So because that's what I've learned. Or so I just, but I guess that's a basic, I would say it's a bias of mine, that I honestly believe people are born perfect and are born at our like, unless they've been damn, like receive trauma in the womb, like That's your highest level of potential right there. Like you're born with this natural love and joy for the world. I mean, you see a baby born
Yeah.
without external poverty and without stress on the mother during pregnancy. And like if there could be some kind of a nurturing place where this baby's born into. I mean, if you look at a baby, they'll show you how to live. I mean, they
Yeah.
look at you directly with love in their eyes.
We
You
do.
know, they look around the world like, what is this? Like, what is this cool, beautiful place?
I mean, to me, you're talking about the trust, the phenomenon of trust, and it's essential in negotiation and business and love. Like nothing works without reciprocity.
And that happens in the first 2 years of life, according to Eric Erickson.
Yeah, and if you don't get that woven into your DNA, or memories, things go awry.
Yeah.
And so I do think, creating safe, healthy places for mothers and families, could solve global warming eventually. Because I mean, we're pooping our nest. You don't want to poop your bed. Like that's just not smart. Like even a
Right.
muskrat knows that, and we're apparently the smartest there is, and we're pooping our nests. It's just, like no animal would do that. Like they don't. That's not smart. And I think it is because of lack of trust and trauma and just these ingrained proclivities for winning. Like violence does work. I mean, it is effective. It just is not effective in the long run.
Yeah.
Anger is real and has its place, and boundaries are real and have their place, um, and violence is an outgrowth of that, from my perspective. And whatever it has its place,
Yeah.
but it's taken over. And
Right.
I do like the parenting model of trust and learning how to be comfortable with discomfort, like trusting myself enough to have a conversation with somebody I disagree with. It's not about me, trying to convince them or shame them or be right. The biggest challenge is overcoming my own fear and my own, ability to trust that I can handle my fear and my judgment in the face of being confronted, like that I'm safe with myself. And so I can face scary situations. Anyway,
And that's what compassion is. Like it's to have enough trust that it's okay for me to like feel what you're like. It's different than empathy, where I would take on those feelings and get blended by the same feelings. Like, oh yeah, that happened to me. Now I'm lost in my feelings. But to be with you with your feelings,
yeah,
like that means I don't have to take them on, but I can be like, oh man. So as a Republican or Democrat or whoever you are, I'm hearing you. And I'm like, oh yeah, I could feel that. I could feel that you feel threatened by this. And even if I completely disagree, I love these words that we use a lot in IFS is that makes sense. That makes sense that you feel that way. Not that I'm not going to say I agree, but I'll say it makes sense that because of what you just told me that concerns you. Um,
and it takes a lot of courage to hold that space with another person and to trust that I'm not going to be overwhelmed, or that they're not going to come at me with a knife. Like it takes a lot of courage to just sit with that. And I think the biggest hurdle is ourselves. Ultimately, it's not our adversary. It's me. And parenting has, taught me to sit with that fear and that judgment, that desire to control,
Mhm.
and to allow my adversary, my child, to be who they are.
Yeah.
And yeah.
And
So
the beautiful thing
yeah.
is when we do that, they become oftentimes what our parts were hoping for, right? Like when our kids are like digging in and not listening and not cooperating, I think our parts want them to cooperate. And if we can accept them for how they are, their protective system can relax and they will cooperate.
Right. So
Often.
much of what we do is just reflexive,
Yeah.
reflexively oppositional.
Right.
And I think in a weird way, that's how we've gotten ourselves into global warming, just gotten ourselves into certain patterns of doing things and just being stubborn and lazy and oppositional about doing things differently.
Yeah.
It's just it's just an unconscious reflexiveness that has like mushroomed into a global situation. Like,
I guess I want to add one more thing. I'm assuming we're going to be wrapping up here in a minute, but um, it's something else you said that reminded me. So I don't know if you've ever read My Grandmother's Hands by Rusma Menakem.
I
He
have
kind
not.
of shares, he calls it like how these traumas are transferred through the body.
Okay.
Um, and he shares there's some of these stories of like even how, when Europeans left Europe and came to this country, the United States, they were leaving persecution. For generations they had been persecuted. And then when they come here, they have this persecution in their body, this trauma in their body. And then they transferred it to like native populations. They transferred it to people from Africa. They transferred it, right? So as we're parenting, that's really important for us to do our healing is because without even realizing it, we will often transfer our trauma, inflict on our own kids. And the only way to stop that chain is to have this courage to look at my own system and try to clean it up as much as possible. So I don't not only re-traumatize my own children, but re-traumatize a whole country as the leader, or to re-traumatize in a whole nother nation because, my parents beat the crap out of me and everyone around me did. So I'm going to beat the crap out of a whole nother nation, you know, or a whole nation beat the crap out of my people. So now we have to transfer that trauma on somebody else, so
Yeah.
be responsible for what we carry instead of like, and obviously we have to do systemic change and we have to like look at our systems. We have to look at how we're living. And I believe people really need to look at, how has my people been traumatized, not just by my own parents, but even as a people, like your own culture, how is that affecting how I treat others in the world?
Yeah, that's where truth telling and artists and journalists are so important, because part of enacting what you're talking about is simply acknowledging what happened. And then from there imagining, something else.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, historians and journalists and artists are indispensable to the cultural dialogue. If we have any hope for change and for, yes, surviving the next 500 years. So what have we settled on? Parenting, trust, uh, turn off your social media, acknowledge the
Feel the
trauma,
real, feel the real feelings.
feel the real feelings. Yeah.
And, and maybe to acknowledge that the one common thing between all of us on the planet is that we're all afraid of something. And what if we can bond over that?
Right.
Or what if you could have compassion for others over that? Like what would shift? Because I guess I'll say this before we leave. I could feel that in my body, even though this is my specialty, a threat. that if I feel compassion towards that other side, the world will tip towards their beliefs.
Right.
Like I have to somehow fight in order to for it not to tip. And Dick Schwartz talks about, and polarities are like that, like two people leaning on sides of a, say, a canoe even, or a rowboat. They're leaning both out, and if I come towards you, the boat's going to flip. So you almost have to come at the same time. But I honestly, it's a belief of a part. But I kind of feel like if I could have somehow compassion for these other people that have very different beliefs to me, to even just at least give them the benefit of the doubt that you might have the exact level of fear that I have, that if you didn't hold your beliefs, the world would flip.
Well, I love
And if you,
that. And what's wrong with swimming? So the boat flips. So what? And you get wet. Like,
yeah, you still can grab the boat and hang on to it, I guess.
exactly. Like, I mean, that happens sometimes. Like,
Right.
if it's a really big fish, it's worth fighting for. I'll grab the rod with you.
Right. So I just wonder if we could, if anyone, my fear is the only people listening to this will be people on one side. But if both sides were hopefully listening to this, I wonder if we could just give that grace to each other that we're all afraid.
Hmm. I'm afraid our time is up, and I feel really good. This has been a lovely conversation, Seth, and
Thank
super
you.
appreciate you and I enjoyed my time with you very much.
Yeah, I love talking to you. It's great how we bounce ideas off of each other and be happy to talk more sometime.